In today's catch-up, we are going to run through the elemental estimate. And inside the elemental estimate, we're going to talk about the structural takeoff. One of the important things to remember with the elemental estimate, it's different to the Rapid Pro. The elemental estimate, we're starting from scratch. There's no square meter rate to get us started. There's no base inclusions. It is absolutely everything from scratch. So in this situation here, we're going to run through our price library and we're going to talk about preliminaries, site preparation, structural. It's actually really important to understand structural with no engineering. And it's also important to understand the building. So we've tried to categorize each part of our price library that reflects the duration of construction and how it all comes together. So for example, you don't do the basins at the start of construction. That's why they're not at the top of the headers. So we've tried to keep this extremely simple. From the start, we're going to talk about the preliminaries. It's a simple how many houses you've got. Now, once you populate the quantity of houses, if you're unsure about the answer that's going to happen inside of when you populate the quantity of houses, you click on the black triangle, it's going to tell you everything that's included. What I always recommend you do is, regardless of an estimate, you always add the quantity of houses. It can always be adjusted inside the BOQ. House setup, we want to add in the square meters of the build, whether it's a single story or double story. We want to add the build duration. Additional bins. Now, what's going to happen is inside your single story or double story house setup, we are going to make an allowance for bins. Now, if you feel that there's going to be a lot of waste, don't be shy of adding extra bins. It's actually really important to add this in. Same with additional deliveries. Sometimes in a standard estimate, a stock standard 10, 12 additional deliveries is okay. But there is an option to add more deliveries. This might be something you add towards the end. As we go further into our preliminaries, we can put in additional items that's required to go through just to get a better understanding of the project. As we go into the site preparations, what we're talking about now is setting up the sand, making sure the site is ready for the slab or the foundations to make the project start. What's really important is if we have to dig out 100 meters of footings, or if we have to dig out board piers, all these additional sorts of information, it's all set up where we have to manually put in the hard digging. As we go through, we're going to have to put in allowances for cut and fill. Now, it's important to understand that we can't price what we can't see. So if we can't see what we're working with, regardless of whatever geo report has been provided, we should make a suitable allowance. Now, we need to use our history to be able to understand what happens here. We need to understand that if it's a high sloping site, we're going to have to put in a higher allowance for provisional sums for the cut and fill. We got to also remember that we have to pay the truck to take the sand away. Backfilling costs, tree removal, rock banking. Usually rock banking is suited for a rural site. So if we have a large block of land and, we need to raise the foundations of the house pad, we're going to have to potentially have rock banking. Site access, it's actually really important to understand, are you dealing with a muddy site? Sometimes you might have a residential site and, there's no driveway, there's no hard sort of landscaping to the front. You might have to put in an access track so we can at least cart material. Important to understand the setup. Screw piles, always need to reference the engineering of making sure that we capture quantities. Now, there is a difference between screw piles and board piers. Screw piles are found in earthworks, usually completed by an external contractor at the earthwork stage, which is a supply and install project. As we go down into the structural, we go into the concrete. This is where you'll find the board piers. We feel they're two different suppliers, so they're in two different categories. Moving out into the structural block work. So this is where we have the retaining subfloor buildups, basically brick piers filled with concrete. This is going to be a complete recipe. Once again, if we don't understand what's included in the recipe, we're going to hit the triangle and be able to show you what's included. Drainage is very important. Also very important to have an understanding of pits. We also need to have a better understanding of whenever we have sand that falls back into the site, we need to allow for stormwater channels. These are our lineal meters that you can select up to. Generally, the typical situation is if we've got the road higher than the carport, we definitely need to possibly put in a strip drain closer to the carport. Sometimes we might need to put in two. So it's important to make sure we understand our plans. Rainwater tanks, self-explanatory. As we go into the structural, this is actually really important. If we have a project and structural engineering is not available, in the real world, we believe when we're submitting our price, we need to be providing a provisional sum for concrete, provisional sum for structural steel. What we've established inside of our setup here is we have those two options. If you have no engineering, when you go into the timber framing and then you go into the beams, we're actually asking you for basically quantities based on opening sizes. So if it's up to 7 meters, we're going to be putting in a 7-meter beam. And if you actually go into the back end data, once you add this into the system, so I'm going to add this 7-meter LVL beam in. What that actually means is that we're adding in a 360. If I was to go back and I added in a up to 5 meters, it's adding in a different size as well. So it's important to have an understanding of what you're dealing with on the plan. Going back into my structural, this is where we extend out more detail into the concrete footings. So we have an extended amount of board piers. It's very important to understand your depth. Typically, if you have a very soft site full of clay, reactive soil, the deeper the board pier is going to be. Pad piers usually found around posts to be able to support the post. Footings. Now we have two items in footings. We have a perimeter footing and an internal thickening footing. The perimeter footing is as it says, which goes around the perimeter of the build. The internal footing, which is the grid thickening that goes internally. There are multiple names for internal thickening footings. We could call this an internal beam, a slab beam. We can call it an internal thickening footing. I'm sure there's multiple different terminologies, but it's understanding that we can put that in the center of all the houses, which is usually at each individual corner. The slab, we have options. Now, very important, one little tip, when we go and do our slab, if we have polished concrete, sometimes it might be worth considering adding 130 mil slab because they need to take a level off the surface to be able to achieve the polished slab. From my understanding, I believe 100 mil is suitable when we do go for polished slabs. But it's also very important to refer back to your engineering and your drawings. We've separated the basement, concrete wall panels, additional construction items. It's also important to remember, and this is critical, a lot of builders that I've been on Zoom with and done short training sessions with, they feel like they don't need to extend out on every category. I believe it's actually really critical to make sure you click out and refer back to your plans to make sure that you have information. Refer to your engineering detail. We have 2 layers of slab mesh. When we calculate our slab up the top here, if you click on the black triangle, we're saying that we only have 1 layer of slab mesh. If your project has 2 layers of slab mesh, you've got to add the additional slab mesh in. Concrete columns, concrete staircases, all these features are all included. These are all what found. And then we go into our concrete pumps and we add the information in. As we go into the suspended slab, very similar process. We're putting in the suspended beams. You could call this I-beams. You could call this suspended beams. You could call it downturn beams. There are multiple names for what this is called. It's basically the beam that supports the span of the slab above if we're doing a concrete beam. Concrete slabs, we're asking you to choose the thickness of your slab. Sometimes we've seen slabs go as low as 150 and as high as, 700. Crazy enough. What we're asking you to do from here is we want you to make a decision higher or lower or average. Now, if you have a situation and you do have a slab that is thicker than 300 mil, reach out, send a request. We can quite possibly create that recipe straight away and then update our price library and make it happen inside the estimate. Timber framing, when we have structural, it's important to always have frames set out. And basically what we're doing from here is we're populating the data as we go. Because we have structural drawings, we're going to do an individual takeoff of everything that's required. Now, here's an example that I have pulled up. So as we look at the structural drawings, we actually have a takeoff between L1 to L4, B1 to B3. What we're actually asking is you will have to make a measurement of what's going on the plan. For example, B3 is a 300 by 63. Now, I want to create an environment where we're not actually measuring, we're making good decisions. For example, we know that this bedroom here is probably 4 meters wide. If I put that little piece of line over to here, it's not going to make it. I would be quite comfortable to say B3, which is a 300 LVL, we're going to make that either 5 or 6 meters. So if I go back to my takeoff, and that is a 300, I'm just going to put in 6 meters. I am not so concerned, and I don't want members to be concerned about putting in the actual meters. We want to make good decisions and good answers. If you have a takeoff program, you can enter it in. You can use a tick button to just say it's done. We want to use techniques to make sure that we're higher, not lower. Because what we also got to remember that we also forget is when we order it, sometimes we don't pay the exact linear meters on the plan. So very important to have an understanding that we always want to be over. For example, if we're doing this B3 beam, which as per our takeoff is another 363, if I put that beam into there, it's definitely going to be short. So I'd be comfortable to say that's 7 meters. I would even be happy to go to 8 meters to make sure I'm covered. We don't need to be precise. We need to make it work. If I was looking at B1, I'd be putting in 4 meters. If I'm looking at B2, I'm putting in probably 5 meters. We want to make sure it's covered. And that's what the whole purpose of this program is all about, is making sure we're covered. I would probably do a takeoff if I'm working out square meters. But sometimes when I'm doing my beams, I will basically make an assumption that is close enough is good enough. But also, if we do want to get technical, it doesn't take very long to do a measurement of all the beams and then punch in the quantities. 2 different styles, 2 different outcomes, 2 different speeds. Always important to go to additional items. Once again, you never know what's hidden inside of our price library. What our goal is we're required to put as much information into our program as possible. So there might be some items that are hidden in there that you might not have thought about. That's the benefit of subscribing, and that's the benefit of what we're providing here. Same structure for the roof takeoff, basically frame set out, measuring your beams, measuring your posts. Now you'll notice in here that we actually don't have the actual roof timber, because when we go down into our building and I go into roofing and I click on my triangle for Colorbond Roof, it's actually going to include the supply of the roof timbers. This whole program in relation to setting up the structural elements of the build is taking quantities and then exploding those quantities that are all the same. For example, when we do an internal wall, when we look at an internal wall on the face surface, it's going to have plasterboard both sides. It's going to have skirting. It's going to have cornice. It's an all-inclusive process. So if you're unfamiliar with that process, click on the black triangle. It will tell you what's included. Right, I've skipped a few steps. No engineering. It's important to make sure we just follow the steps. We've already spoken briefly about using the beams up to the sizes. We believe that once the engineering has been received, always basically remove the items out of here and put the items back into here. As I expand out on the building, it's very important to go step by step. We're doing a renovation, there's always going to be repair and rectification works to set up. If you're doing a large renovation, I've got a project here that I have an example of. It's not a very big house. I'd expect the electrician to come in for maybe 1 or 2 days to prepare the site, ready to go. It's exactly the same with a plumber. We're pulling apart the laundry in the kitchen. These steps have got to happen. So we're actually thinking about the process of construction. As we go into demolition, our demolition is quite extensive. We have a lot of items captured in our demolition, and it's very important to think about how it's going to get pulled apart. A lot of estimators have made multiple bad decisions when it comes to estimating. For example, let's just try this out for a sec. If on the plans, they've said this wall in pink needs to be removed, as an estimator, we need to make a good decision. That whole wall is going to get removed in reality. Sometimes what's drawn on the plan when it comes to a demolition takeoff is not exactly the same process of what happens in construction. As an estimator to other estimators, and as an estimator to builders, and as an estimator to homeowners, with demolition takeoffs, we are not going to be so cautious. We're going to make sure that we cover everything. And if not, we are going to allow more, because demolition is probably one of the hardest elements in construction. I always like to say to my team, when we're ripping out a when we're ripping out a window, it's not just as simple as ripping it out. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes we might need to take out some external wall. Sometimes we might need to remove the cladding. So if I go down to my external items and I remove window, I need to potentially remove cladding. So we've got to really think through that process. So setting up the structural elements of a demolition takeoff is actually critical. Sometimes what you see on plan is not what happens on site. This program is set up to basically make you think step by step of the construction methods. And if you dive deep into what we've built, we have remove window, then next to it is remove cladding. It's there for a reason. It's exactly the same as some of these quantities. They're usually there for a reason. We're not going to have 1/2 meter of removed cladding. That is generally not going to happen. Okay, internal items, it's as you see it. Now, same process. Let's not measure 3.2 meters. Let's just say, too bad, we're going to go to 4. We're going to click this twice. We've got to really make sure we have an understanding of the project. As I've said previously, sometimes what we see on the plan doesn't always happen. However, some houses are structurally sound. And if the houses are structurally sound and we need to replace the plasterboard, let's remove wall lining only. Let's remove ceiling. If we're not familiar with what's inside of what's included to remove ceiling, click the triangle and it will tell you everything that's included. Demolition, tick. We can go down into external. We can go down into external machinery hire. We can do a full demolition. Asbestos is something critical. Just because we don't have asbestos up here, it could be found in here. So it's important to make sure you're familiar with your price library. External walls, we need to be experts as an estimator of understanding what our external wall dimensions are. As an estimator, one of the hardest parts that I've found across the industry is everybody draws external walls and internal walls differently. There is absolutely nothing stopping the architect saying to us that these external walls are cladding. So just because it's drawn as brick, that doesn't mean it's brick. Let's make sure that we always go to the elevations and refer what's happening. As we go further into it, let's make sure that we read. You know, there is quite an easy solution to it. If I was to be super, super technical, that actually could possibly be a brick wall because of the hatching. But if we actually read the description, it's actually a cladding wall. We can also go back to our elevations and make sure that that is correct. From my perspective, it's a cladding wall, the way it's been drawn. So let's make sure that we do an extensive amount of information of researching our wall types because it's absolutely critical. Now, once again, let's not get caught too much into the descriptions. Take it as face value and we go from there. Super interesting feature that we've done inside of our platform is we have wall types. The reason why we have wall types is so that we can capture different costings of bricks. We might have 3 types of bricks on a project. That equals 3 different types of prices for supply and labor. Fast forward a little bit out of the external wall and internal walls. Moving to the internal walls, we have different types of structures. Perfect example of what happens here is click on your black triangle and it's going to tell you everything that's included. We are working on a process to give a description of what the internal wall means. Work in progress, and we're always trying to do better and improve. Windows is a very interesting one for us. There's 2 different ways to measure windows. What we can do is we can work out the square meters by using a measuring tool and, calculating the area. Or we can actually do windows a different way for a takeoff. Once again, our goal is to make sure that we have more square meters. We need to take into consideration waste. We need to take into consideration minimum charges, how glass is purchased. So if we take estimating from the surface and put in the actual perfect square meters, we're potentially putting ourselves in a situation to lose. So what I like to do is I will sometimes go, well, that's a full height opening, that's a full height opening, and that's a full height opening. That total linear meters is 9 meters. I'm just going to put that into my full height for 9 meters. That 9 meters is going to be multiplied by 3. That gets us 27 square meters. And then I have my half height openings. If I just go, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 meters of half height opening windows multiplied by 1.8, 1.5. That's going to get us square meters. And we should be pretty close to what it would be if we did it the long way. When we do the opening glazings, that's going to allow for a standard sash. But then we have to add the accessories. That's an additional cost. Awning windows, casement windows, double hung windows, fixed windows. Very important to make sure you understand. External glazed doors. Now, we've had a rule that stuck with me for a very long time. Everyone builds different, so there's no right or wrong. In the laundry, generally they have a single door. I always like to make that laundry door an aluminium frame door, regardless if it opens in or opens out. From my understanding, I might be out of touch a little bit, but if the door opens in, we can make it timber. If the door opens out, it has to be aluminium. I've always said to my estimators, the golden rule, if it's a single door there, we're going to make that an aluminium door. Each to their own, follow the plans, and sometimes I will go extra over and go above the plans if need be. Roofing. Straight and simple as it sounds. Adding your square meters of roofing. An item that sometimes get missed a lot, and estimators really need to be considerate of this, is repair roofing. What you want to be able to do is, let's see if I can pull up the roof plan. There's the roof plan. There's the roof plan. There we go. As you can see, all this hatching is new roof. Now, the builder doesn't want to go back to the client and say, oh, can we please have an extra $800 to repair the capping? Some of the tiles are cracked. You want to make sure that's added into your estimate. So that's why we have repair roofing. We want to have a cost inside the system so we don't have to go back for variations. Simple as it sounds, we've got to put in down pipes, usually every corner, no span longer than 8 meters. Everyone has different rules. Flashing. Don't get too scared about the price that's visible. We can always reduce the price when we go back into the estimate. Skylights, as it sees, pergola, and all other items. I have 5 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly talk about the markup and contingency. This is actually really critical for when we do estimating. If the project is difficult, if we are dealing with a difficult site, if we have engineering details that is extremely technical, if we have a lot of beams on the project, Generally, what's going to happen is either your concreter, your carpenter, your steel guy, your bricklayer, they're going to charge you more money. What we've built into our system is markup and contingency. We want you to be able to change these levels of markup and contingency, which is basically saying, is it complexity 1? Is it complexity 4? As a builder, they need to be able to make a decision if the structural steel is easy. Now, if it's easy, don't change it. If it's hard, change it to level 2. The pricing will change. If it's extremely difficult, change it to level 4 and we move forward from there. What I want to try to do now is I want to bring up a BOQ. And from here, I want to show you guys one more step that's inside the checking process. And it has not worked. All right, we're just going to put that on hold for a sec. Doesn't seem like it's going to load. Right. Well, that's all I've got for today. I'm going to stop recording and hopefully we can catch up and discuss next week the finishing items.
Thanks, Rick.